Hola, bienvenidos al podcast de los mandatos en español. Welcome, I'm Senora Stanius, and this is the vodcast 4.1. We're going to be talking about commands. Students will be reviewing on how we use commands in Spanish. We will look at both the formal and informal commands of both written and spoken Spanish. We need to look at the differences between the usted and ustedes commands, tú commands, and the nosotros commands in Spanish. We're going to start with the formal commands, those usted and ustedes commands. Make sure as you're going through this podcast that you're pausing as you need in order to write down any questions you have and to fill in notes and write down information on your grammar sheets. These are the formal commands. I've chosen tomar, volver, and salir as your examples. Remember, we are using formal commands to give orders or advice to people that we address as usted and ustedes. Remember, these forms are identical to the present subjunctive forms for the usted and ustedes, which means that if there's a stem change, as in volver, that stem change has to be present in the command, vuelva or vuelvan. Or if it's an irregular yo form, salga, salgan, that you have that irregularity in the usted and ustedes affirmative and negative commands. We'll move on to the tú commands, those familiar commands. Here are your examples. Notice the differences between the affirmative and the negative commands in the familiar commands. Remember, we use these when we are going to address people we would address as tú. The affirmative tú commands have the same form as the él, ella, usted form of the present indicative. Viaja, empieza, pide. Negative tú commands, however, have the same form as the tú form of the present subjunctive. So, no viajes, no empieces, no pidas. And so those present subjunctive irregularities that I mentioned before with the usted and ustedes commands also is true for the negative tú commands. There are 8 irregular affirmative tú commands. Make sure you write these down. Take note of them. Di, haz, ve, pon, sal, se, ten, and then. Looking at our nosotros commands, here are your examples. Nosotros commands are used to give orders or suggestions that include yourself as well as other people. It's what we would in English probably say as let's dance or let's not drink. Affirmative and negative commands for the nosotros commands are generally identical to the nosotros forms of the present subjunctive. Bailemos, no bailemos. So again, if those irregularities, stem changing, are in the present subjunctive form, they are in the nosotros command as well. There are 2 times that there's an irregular form with ir and irse. So vamos and vámonos are your affirmative commands, and your negative commands would be no vayamos and no nos vayamos. We sometimes will be using pronouns with reflexive verbs with commands. Or we could be using object pronouns. When we do these with affirmative commands, they are always attached to the verb. However, when they are used with negative commands, the pronouns will appear after the verb, no, but before the verb. So an example, with wake up early, levántense temprano. Don't wake up early, no se levanten temprano. When the pronouns no and se are attached to an affirmative nosotros command, then the final s of the command form is dropped. And here are some examples for that. Sentémonos aquí. However, in the negative, there's no change. No nos sentemos aquí. Or démonoselo mañana. No se lo demos mañana. Last thing we need to look at with our commands are our indirect commands. These are, if they're for él, ella, ellos, and ellas, these are very specific situations. The construction que plus the verb in the third person subjunctive can be used to express an indirect command. And it corresponds to kind of what we want to say in English when we want to say, let someone do something. Let them do that. If the subject of the indirect command is expressed, then it usually follows the verb. I'll give you some examples of this, which will hopefully help clear this up. So let the next person pass. If you're standing in line, que pase el siguiente. Or maybe the teacher will tell you, let her do it. Que lo haga ella. Again, as with the other uses of the subjunctive, if there are pronouns used in this particular situation, they are never attached to the conjugated verb in this situation, regardless of whether the indirect command is affirmative or negative. So this is a little bit different. Que lo vuelvan a hacer. Let them do it again. Que no lo vuelvan a hacer. Don't let them do it again. And notice that, again, all of these must start with the word que. Make sure you complete the Google form that follows this podcast. Please make sure you have written down your questions that you can ask me. We will talk about this in class. Muchas gracias y hasta mañana.